Hi, my name is Rikard Larsson. I am a professor in business administration from Lund University in Sweden. I'm also a co-founder of Decision Dynamics, where I spend most of my working days. I'm very happy to be able to speak to you today about making decisions in the hyperloaded pandemic VUCA world. Just a little bit first about Decision Dynamics, where we provide solutions to identify future leaders, developing more engaging leadership, strengthening employee engagement in teams and units and whole organizations. It's based on 50 years of research and practice in the leadership and talent management areas, where we've been working with great companies globally, as well as publishing in Harvard Business Review and Academy of Management and so forth. An important distinction for us is to distinguish between static and dynamic approaches to talent. Static assessments are assessments of IQ and personality. That is what you are. That is stable traits that do not change over time, in contrast to the behavioral and situational fit that we call dynamic assessments. This is what you do and where and when you do it, and these are dynamic competences and motives that develop over time and can change, adapt to new situations. This is quite important for today's topic because talent assessment has its roots in pre-VUCA times. What do we mean by VUCA times? VUCA is a concept that was invented in the 1990s. It stands for it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In a world that is more VUCA-like, these static tools that actually are most of the talent tools that are used today, that measures IQ and Big Five and like OPQ, and there are developmental tools like MBTI and so on, they become less relevant because the world is so much more dynamic. It wasn't until 1990s that we discovered that our mature brains, even they change. It's something called neuroplasticity. You can change your brain just by looking at the TED Talk, actually. And that makes things like learning agility and other dynamic aspects more and more important every day. If we go back and take a look at the background of VUCA, it took us about a couple of 100 years to go from 1 billion people to 2 billion people, along with the Industrial Revolution. Then there was an economist called Schumpeter that discovered that competition that was then increasing destroyed old solutions and replaced them with new creative solutions. Once we get into the latter parts of the 1900s, the digital revolution showed up, and at the early 1990s, it was US Army War College that came up with this new concept. About simultaneously as Richard Daveny invented the concept of hyper-competition, which saying that competition is now so much worse than it was before, so we need to consider it that we are in a hyper-competitive world. That is then also VUCA. But there is something missing if you look at this picture. What is missing? Well, first, we are actually about 2 more billion people in it, soon 8 billion. Digital revolution didn't really get into full gear until the internet showed up, which was closer to 2000. So neither Amazon nor Google was born until after we came up with the VUCA concept and hypercompetition. And they have certainly contributed to changing the world much faster. And now, most recently, we even then have the pandemic on top of everything, making things even worse. So we should call this the VUCA plus world, where we are facing what could be called the hyperload. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So how do we make decisions in a VUCA plus world? To discuss this further, I need to introduce you to Decision Dynamics decision style model, which is based on 4 different decision styles that you change them depending on the situational load. There are also different role styles and operating styles, as well as dynamics as you move across the leadership pipeline. So what are these styles then? Well, first, they are not static IQ. They are cognitive, but they are habits that you have learned and that you can unlearn and relearn. They are influenced by culture and experience through your life. And importantly, there is no one best style. Each style has both advantages and disadvantages. It depends on the situation, which is most effective and least effective. Importantly, not least for coaches like you, they can be developed. You can build certain styles and you can tone down other styles, that depending on what you need in terms of the situation. So when you make decisions, there are at least 2 major dimensions that we need to consider. It's how much information you use, and if you not use so much, we call it satisficer. You use just enough information to get to a decision so you can act quickly. On the other hand, we have those that are maximizers, so saying we don't know if we have learned as much as we could if we stop with so little information. Perhaps this value of information continues to go up. So the maximizer needs to be certain that you have learned almost everything of value before they make a decision. So these are 2 very different ways of making decisions. Which one is best? Well, it depends on the situation. If things are urgent, satisficer tend to be better. If things are more important than urgent, that you get it right, like high quality or safety or something like that, then maximizer is better. But what do you think a satisficer thinks about a maximizer? Well, it tends to be not so nice words, like slow, like a lot of talk but no action, or actually pretty stupid because they collect all this information, they still can't make up their mind. So the satisficer don't like the maximizer. What does the maximizer think about the satisficer then? Well, that doesn't seem to be so nice either. Satisficer is hasty, reckless, can't think longer than their nose. So they must be pretty stupid, I guess. So this is a very common ground for conflict between people, that you actually prefer to use different amounts of information when you make decisions. And this becomes even clearer when we go to the next dimension, and that's focus. Whether you use a lot of information or less information, you can generate one solution, which is called unifocus, and you stick with that over time. Or you can generate many solutions. Either you try one and try another, try a third, and then you switch between them. Or you try to juggle them all at the same time without giving up any of them. Many solutions equal multifocus. Which is best? Well, it depends on the situation again. If it's a stable situation where you have a good, efficient solution, then it's more effective to focus on that one. However, if it's a changing situation, so what was right yesterday is now wrong tomorrow, or we don't know which is the best solution, or there's a lot of people involved, then multifocus tend to be better. But even if no one is best or worst all the time, what do you think a unifocus thinks about a multifocus? Any interesting words come to mind? Well, they can't make up their minds because they change all the time. They are turning them in the wind. They are uncertain. Or can you even rely on them? Because they said one thing yesterday and say another thing next day. They must be pretty stupid. Or what do you think a multifocus thinks about a unifocus? Well, narrow-minded, tunnel vision, rigid, must be pretty stupid, because even if a UFO stopped outside the window, you wouldn't change your mind even then. So this is a very common ground for conflict. Just think about a contract. Unifocus thinks a contract is a contract. You stick to it. Multifocus thinks a contract is a working document. So multifocus calls unifocus up and say, we got to make some changes. What do you mean changes? We can't change a contract. It's a contract. Well, but we didn't know those things before, and so on. So this is common ground for conflict. If we combine these two dimensions, we get the four basic decision styles. Two of them being satisficers or maximizers, and two of them being unifocus or multifocus. Satisficers tend to be more action-oriented and fast, and maximizers tend to be more thinking-oriented and analytical. Unifocus are more persistent and try to control the environment for the decisions that you have made, while multifocus is more open and adapts to this environment as it changes. The first decision style is then called decisive. This is the most action-oriented, most clear, doesn't talk much, but does what he or she says. Quite loyal, often in a hurry, often looking at their watch, don't want them to come even 5 minutes late. That's a straightforward style to make decisions. But there is another style which is called flexible, which is also fast, action-oriented. And initially you might not even see the difference, but give it 5 minutes. Then the flexible tend to start doodling if there are paper and pen, or looking out the window, or talking to their neighbor, or asking a question, or trying to change this topic, or hoping for a joke or a break, anything that can break this monotony, because flexible easily get bored with the same thing if they get this kind of one-way presentation that I'm unfortunately giving to you now. So I apologize to all flexibles. This is a one-way PowerPoint presentation, but we can hopefully talk a little bit more after this recording. Then we have the hierarchic style, which is perhaps not the best of labels. It's not that they are trying to climb a hierarchy in order to become a higher boss. It's because we put one long-term goal, one vision that is sticking there in the future, and you try to plan detailed wise on how to get there. Where it's very important what quality, which evidence, which logic. So how you do things are very important to the hierarchic, and they don't want to delegate it away. They like to control it more themselves because they happen to know the best. And finally, you have the integrative style. Those that have multiple parallel trains of thoughts going on in their head, but they have only one mouth. So you can hear an integrative talk on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand, where did that come from, fourth hand, and then they try to go back because they don't want to give up any alternative. They like to keep papers in piles, and they don't like to close doors. They like to keep all options open, and so on. They're more creative. They can come half an hour late for a meeting, but they can talk for 2 more hours because it was so interesting once you got there. They like to cooperate in teams. They like to see the whole picture and so on. So here you got the 4 different styles. And remember that the satisficers and maximizers thought each other was stupid, and unifocus and multifocus thought each other was even more stupid. Well, a diagonal becomes even worse. It's doubly stupid. A flexible, looking at the hierarchic, seeing that the hierarchic is basically both slow and rigid, the worst of both worlds, while the hierarchic is looking at the flexible, saying this person is both hasty and unreliable, the worst of both worlds. And there you have a very difficult situation. Now, we are not just one style, we switch styles. And one of the reasons we switch styles is because of what was originally called the situation, the environmental load. But now we're talking so much more about the environment in terms of climate change and so on. So we are beginning to call it more the situational load, to not confuse it. And it consists of how much time pressure the situation has, how much uncertainty it has, how much complexity it has, how important consequences of the decision is, and how emotionally loaded the situation is. And these 5 sets of situational factors was actually developed already in the 60s and 70s by this model's originator, Professor Michael Driver. And look, compare that to VUCA. It has basically 3.5 of VUCA. Time pressure is another one that comes close to volatility. Then we got uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is one of the emotions that we're actually measuring with this tool. So to me, I was very glad that somebody else came up with the VUCA concept 20 years later to make better use of this model. So high load is many tough deadlines, high uncertainty, complexity, and so on. And this affects decision-making in the following way. If you have very low load, there is no point in using a lot of information or a lot of alternatives. So you use the simple decisive style. But if load increases, then there is more point in making use of more information and more focus to get as good decisions or even creative decisions. But this is not a linear process where you can just, the more load, the more integrative you become. At some point, there is too much load. It's called overload. So while you are trying to improve the decisions up to a certain point, next, if load gets higher, you have to simplify. You can reduce the number of alternatives back to hierarchic, or you can jump to any kind of solution that fits the customer, the flexible style, or if you're completely overloaded, there is only one default action of something that then becomes decisive and you can't change it. So there is both, you try to improve decisions up to a point, then you have to simplify things because you become overloaded. So if we connect this then to the VUCA situation, how do we lead and decide in a VUCA plus world? Well, the easiest combination with VUCA and decision style is that when volatility increases, we need to respond with more fast flexibility. So that's what's volatility. It's the opposite of hierarchic, which is slow and rigid. So you need to be fast adaptive to match the volatility. That's clear. But then we run into problems. Uncertainty is a lack of information, so you need more information. So the way to deal with uncertainty is to gather more information. But that goes against the load idea. And complexity, that consists both of number of different things and how they are related, and that requires both more information and more alternatives. So that goes also in this direction. And ambiguity is about different alternative interpretations that can be confusing, and you need to have alternatives to sort out the alternatives, so to speak. So you need more multi-focus to deal with ambiguity. And here we see the beginnings of the real problem, because remember, I just told you that the more uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the more we have to simplify our decision making. So the situational adaptation goes in the complete opposite direction. We need more information, we need more alternatives, but this overload, that is hyper overload nowadays, forces us to simplify, to hierarchic, to flexible, and in the end, to the decisive style, which is the opposite of what is needed in a VUCA situation. So here we have more than a gap. This is not just a little gap. This is a canyon. This is a crater. It's a horrible gap between where we are forced by the load to simplify when we need to add information, deal with complexity and ambiguity. So here we have the crux, the paradox, where how can we solve this huge gap that hyperload in a VUCA world creates? And you will be the first one to see our solution, since I made this slide for you yesterday. Problem, we can't deal with that gap alone. We have to deal with it together, because we have different strengths and different weaknesses. If we can put those strengths together and learn together and decide together and act together, then we can start bridging this hyper gap, or whatever we should call it. We should find some of those simple, fast routines that can take off some of the many things on our table. That can create some space, so we also can be fast in adapting to volatile changes. And if we can do those two fast solutions, that could in turn open up a little bit of windows to make some quality solutions to the most important uncertain problems that we are facing. And if we can do that, we can even open somewhat bigger windows to be creative in terms of teamwork on holistic issues. The integrative style needs the biggest windows, so we can't be integrative about everything. But if the other three styles can offload a lot of things that we don't have to be creative about, then we can create a creative window to complement the others. So that is the solution. It's based on that we are individually different. So I will end this presentation with 3 more slides on how we as individuals are different and what we can do about it. We not only switch styles because of how much load we are facing, we also switch our decision styles depending on which audience we are with. We have role styles that we are quite self-aware of, that we use when we are with a customer or with our boss or with in front of a group or privately on a first date. Then we are very aware of how we should behave well. And that is a true decision style. It's not a fake mask. It's what we do socially. But it doesn't tell the whole decision-making story, because there is also the back. If the front role style is the front office, the operating style is the back office. That is where we go off to ourselves and sit down and think about things, or we are so focused on a task that we forget about the audience, or we know each other so well, so we're not thinking about how to make a good impression. Like we've been married for a couple of years, and you can know that between 60 and 90% of us have different role and operating styles. So we switch styles depending on where we are, with whom we are actually. And if you answer 105 questions, you can get your whole decision style profile, which is not just one role style and one operating style. It's a score on each of the 4 role styles and each of the 4 operating styles. And the higher the blue bars are, the more strong habit of making decisions in a front office in this way. So if you look at Susan here, She is decisive, mainly. That's her primary role style. So she will mostly act quickly, clearly, being focused and so on when she is in the front office. And secondary is hierarchic. So both are unifocus, quite strong-minded person who typically don't change if people would ask her to. But then, looking at her operating style, she's quite different. She has a lot of much more complex decision-making information. There is a lot of information, hierarchic, integrative, and also more money alternatives, flexible and integrative. So there is much more complexity in her decision-making in the back office. These bars can also change. You can train them, you can tone down something that doesn't work so well for you, and you can build up something that might be lacking. This is then where perhaps it comes all together, because we can see how we can complement one another in a leadership pipeline. Because we are quite proud that we, together with Confera International, did a huge study, probably the world's greatest leadership pipeline study ever so far, with 180,000 managers in 50 countries on 5 different managerial levels. It was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2006. It was republished 5 years later as a classic already in 2011. And if we look here, we see that the success profile of the 20% best supervisors is quite decisive and secondarily hierarchic. That is, there is a unifocus, like Susan, for instance. But then you see already at the middle manager level, one level up, we have a balance of all 4 styles. At the middle manager level, you need to be balanced so you can coordinate downwards, sideways, and upwards. It becomes a bit of a hub that much of the organization circles around, or multi-hub. But then you see for the higher manager positions, what was least important for a supervisor becomes the most important for directors, VPs, and C-level CEOs. And the integrative style, which wasn't so important for supervisors, become the second most important. So multi-focus becomes more important the higher up you climb in the organization in order to be able to deal with more sets of stakeholders, which you have the higher up you get. You have a smaller set of stakeholders if you're only a supervisor. So this is the lens of success, and it becomes even more clear when you compare it with the 20% worst performers at each level, where the worst supervisors are even more unifocused. They are so unifocused that they were probably a great individual contributor that got promoted to become a supervisor, but was too focused to be able to also lead and manage other people than themselves. And then look at this. This is the failure profile of middle managers. Do you recognize this combination of decisive, hierarchic, non-flexible persons? Well, it's almost identical with the success profile of the supervisors, which is a very, very interesting observation. So the worst middle managers are the best supervisors who have been promoted one level too high and did not change their decision-making, even though the requirement changed drastically. There are huge differences between supervisors and middle managers, and there are huge differences between middle managers and higher managers. But who do we promote? Of course, we promote the best on the previous level, but the best on the previous level is actually not a good predictor for becoming best at the next level. It actually is a good predictor for being the worst at the next level, unless there are coaches like you who can help them with the transition. Remember, Goldsmith, what got you here will not get you there. That's a part of this logic that we see here with scientific precision. And So we need to stop over promoting people. Actually, this study shows that between 10 and 30% of all our best managers are wasted by promoting them one level too high, where you lose the best manager at the previous level and you get some of the worst manager at the higher level. And if this is done higher, it creates a chain reaction where you have to promote someone else to fill up that process. So it's actually a horror story. But these decision styles can be used both to select better and especially to develop better, because these decision styles are not written in stone. You can change if you know that you should change. And if we look at the best middle managers, compare those to the worst, and we can see again that they have been promoted one level too high. This is very common, very wasteful, and we should do something about it. And I think you can do a lot about it as coaches and similar consultants and so on. So that was my main message. And if there are any questions, I will hopefully be able to answer them live. And if there are any contacts, anything you want to discuss after the conference, here is a email. And I also like to thank Flavio Kosminski, who was the person who recommended me to participate here. And he is knowledgeable in this area and someone you can contact in Brazil. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to take your questions live.